Today, Jackie and I are going to be talking about procurement. Welcome, Jackie. So I know we want to do a general overview of procurement, but also a couple of updates on the federal and state levels. But let's first ground everyone, get everyone on the same page here. Jackie, can you tell us all what is procurement?
Yeah, so procurement is just a fancy word for shopping, basically, or purchasing. So, really, it's the process of obtaining goods and services at the best possible price. Procurement rules and regulations apply to all schools, no matter the size, how many kids they feed, how much federal or state money they get. And that's because our school nutrition programs receive money from the USDA. And then some states also pitch in some money, such as California. Um, and you also might recall how our programs are, we get money. So we're reimbursed by the number of meals we served. When you put in your claim, the state then pays you, and that money gets stored into what's called the nonprofit school food service account. But you also might hear that called the cafeteria account, or that might be what you call it at your school. Um, and when all that money gets put into the cafeteria fund, it's really important to remember that cafeteria fund money can only be used for operation and improvement of our food service. So there's lots of rules and regulations governing what we can and cannot purchase with that money.
Okay, that's a great overview. Thank you so much. Now, on the ground, how do school nutrition programs procure goods and services?
Yeah, that's a really great complicated question. So basically, there's three major methods of procurement that we're really going to focus on. There's the micro purchase threshold, which is anything less than $50,000 that you're spending. And that's if you're able to self-certify to the 50,000 micro purchase threshold. Some states and schools might be restricted to a $10,000 micro purchase threshold. Um, but then the second one is going to be our small purchases, which is if we're above that micro purchase threshold, but yet below 250,000, that's going to be what's considered a small purchase. And then for our big formal stuff, our big purchases, we move into what's called formal procurement, which is when we spend more than $250,000 with a vendor.
Okay, now can we go through these one on one?
Yeah, for sure. So with the micro purchase threshold, this is really a threshold that helps us kind of purchase the things we need quickly and easily. There's not a lot of regulation or rules around it. It's really the threshold that lets us just go buy what we need. So like for big districts, that have a lot of formal contracts maybe, but let's say, oh, I was shorted, 5 loaves of bread. I need to just run to the store and get some. Perfect. Micro purchase has got you covered. It's also super helpful for our really small districts that don't have don't really have the ability to buy a ton of food, nor do they have the space and that kind of thing. They just don't feed as many kids. They can really easily just go and buy food with not a lot of rules, if you will, with purchasing them. And then so the couple things with micro is you still need to like pay a good price. You don't want to be like spending an outrageous amount of money still. You want to make sure you're paying a reasonable price. And then if you recall, you've been around a little while, you might have remembered that a couple of years ago they updated the language in procurement for micro purchases where they were saying if you were going to use micro purchase, you had to spend the same amount of money and be equitable among your vendors.
Mm.
That doesn't totally make sense, especially for small districts. So luckily, a couple years ago, they updated that language and it now says, it's a best practice to equitably distribute our money, but it's not a must anymore.
Okay, now after micro purchasing, what's the next tier again?
That would be our small purchases. So
Got it.
this is, above our micro purchase threshold, but still less than 250,000, per vendor in a year. And the things to remember with small purchase is, we have to get 2 to 3 quotes. So this is our price quote threshold. 2 quotes is required, 3 is best practice. And really the key to remember with our small purchase is that price is the determining factor. We have to go with whatever vendor comes in cheapest. We need to have written specifications for what we're looking for in a product also, so that, when we get our quotes and our prices, we're really comparing apples to apples to make sure we're comparing prices on comparable items. So, we don't want to compare an apple to an orange because they're not comparable. So those specifications can help us, make sure that the quotes we're getting are reasonable. And then just a note is, like, you might hear the small purchase called informal purchase method or simplified acquisition, and some people call it the 3 bids and a buy method.
Wow, there's a lot of different aliases there for that method. Okay, now what if I'm over that $250,000?
Yeah, so then comes to our big formal purchases. These are our big contracts. And they take a little bit more time and paperwork. So there's really 2 types that we really see. There's the invitation for bid and the request for proposal. I'll just say I normally see at schools an RFP. That's probably the most common one. And like I said, there's really a lot more paperwork. We have to have advertisements and written solicitations. We have to have a whole bid packet that includes Buy American provision. But one of the benefits of it is we have some scoring criteria. And so it's really nice to be able to put together some criteria of what we're looking for in a vendor. And then you go with the vendor that scores the highest, which is really nice because it can kind of help us pick a vendor that really is going to meet the needs of our school. And the other nice thing that could be helpful with our formal contracts is that a lot of them can be written to renew for 2 to 3 years commonly, but
Mm.
you can even have them renewed up to 5 years if that's what you really need.
Oh, wow, that's great. And it sounds like you can be a lot more particular in formal procurement. And thank you for the overview on all these 3 procurement methods. Now, of course, I have so many follow-up questions, and I'm sure our listeners do too. So those of you that are live on the call, please pop your questions into the chat. Now, Jackie, if it's all right with you, I just want to dig a little deeper into what you said earlier about micro purchasing and that self-certification method. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, great question. So when we talk about micro purchase self-certification, the first step in that is to see if you're considered a low risk oddity. So in order to self-certify, we basically have to prove that you're not a financial liability or risk. And so the best way to do that is with your financial audit. So every year your school probably gets what's called a single audit. And it's a financial audit that looks at your entire school. And if you have no federal program audit findings on that, then you would be designated low risk. And it says it right in the audit report if you're low risk or not. And
Mm.
then districts that might be too small to get that single audit, your district might have what's more of like an internal risk assessment that identifies and mitigates financial risk that could help identify you as a low risk oddity. Now, the thing I will mention is that if you're on your single audit, it says that you are not a low risk oddity, but you had no school nutrition financial findings or no federal program findings to that matter, it would definitely be worthwhile reaching out to your analyst or your state agency to ask if there is another way to determine low risk. So
Mm.
just be aware of that. If you look at that audit and it's like, well, it doesn't say I am, is there something else I could do? Definitely reach out and ask. It's worth it, in my opinion. So then that's the first step. Very first thing is we have to determine that. So once we determine that we are considered low risk, then it's pretty straightforward after that. Just a little bit of paperwork, of course. So we need to update our procurement procedures to say that we self-certify to the $50,000 micro purchase threshold, and we have to have a self-certification justification piece paper on file. So it's basically a templated form that says, we're a low risk oddity. We want to opt into this because it's going to help our school X, Y, and Z. And you sign and date it, and the key is to remember to do it every single year. So yeah, that's really it for micro purchase self-certification.
Well, thanks for that. Now, it definitely sounds like there's a few steps here, but it sounds pretty doable. And it's also really nice that the self-certification process allows schools to use that higher 50,000 threshold. It's a lot more. I'm feeling more comfortable with this micro purchasing process, but zooming back out, when we think about the three major methods, how would I know what procurement method is right for my program?
Yeah, so really, this is going to kind of tie back to our yearly planning and forecasting. So, the first thing we really want to do is sit down and look, what vendors are we buying from and how much are we planning on spending with them? So, if you're going to be spending less than 50,000 with a vendor, fabulous. We can just go with the micro purchase and it's easy peasy. Just go and buy what you need. If you're going to be hovering around that 50,000, like, oh, we're right on the edge, I'm not really sure, then I would move into that small purchase threshold, because even though the micro purchase is a transaction by transaction threshold, if you end up spending more than 50,000 with a single vendor in a year, you need to follow small purchase procurement procedures. So if you're right on the edge, better to be safe, get your quotes, have your specifications, and kind of just move forward with that small
Hmm.
purchase. But let's say that, you look and do a forecasting and you're definitely within the small purchase threshold, but not to that 250 yet. The next thing I would kind of evaluate is, okay, what do I want to be the driving factor in choosing a vendor? Is it price and always price? I want the lowest price and that's who I will always go with. Fabulous. Go with small purchase, because that's what you have to with that one. But let's say you want to use some other criteria to kind of determine which vendor you want to go with, then it's probably going to be more worthwhile for you to go the formal route and create those evaluation criteria so that you can really pick the vendor that really fits the needs for your program. And then obviously, if you're going to be spending over 250,000 with a vendor, you have to go with the formal purchasing. So again, really, it's going to be very specific to what your school needs, who you purchase from, and those types of things. And once you sit down and figure out who you're buying from and kind of figure out a price range, decision tree like this one could be super helpful to kind of guide those decisions.
Yeah, and I love a good map. That decision tree visual is really helpful for me. Okay, so let's say I wanted to prioritize purchasing local foods from local vendors. And what if I'm a big district and I want to do farm to school, but I know I'm going to spend more than 50,000? How can I prioritize that local procurement?
Yeah, this is really important these days, especially, I would say, especially in California, because there's so much money that you guys have been getting to purchase local specifically. So when it comes to these local purchases, I'll go through them all, but micro is super easy. Like we mentioned a few times now, micro purchase, you buy what you buy, and that's great. That's good. If we're going to be above that 50,000 or into the small purchase threshold, um, best thing to do is pick the vendors that meet
Hmm.
your local criteria. So let's say, Sally's Beets and Johnny's Celery, they both sell the things that you want. I would get quotes from them because they're both local vendors, they're comparable items, and then no matter who comes in a lower price, you're still getting the local product, which is great. And then again, hopefully you have two vendors in the area. If you have three, three is best to get quotes from. And then let's say you have a really big, a lot of money to spend with local foods, and you are going to be above 250, and we need to go formal. Right now, we can't use specify local as a criteria, but you can say things like hours from harvest and apply geographical preference when you're creating your bid packet. So the nice thing though is, or good news rather, is with some upcoming rules and regulation changes in the final rule. Yes, there we go. The they're looking to change that language, which would let us specify our local in our bids. And
Hmm.
but we have to wait until April, end of April, to see if that gets through. So hopefully it will, we'll see. But as of right now, we cannot use local as a specification.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. And speaking of the USDA and kind of things going on at the federal level, are there things that we should be aware of going into the next school year around procurement? Is there anything new on the federal level?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to be aware of. You may have heard the Child Nutrition Program Integrity Final Rule was released back in August of 23. And really, what this is going to do is it's going to require all nutrition directors and any staff with procurement related duties to have annual procurement training starting next school year. So, starting beginning of school year 24-25, whoever's involved with purchasing food at your district needs to have some training. And lucky for you pro users, LunchAssist is coming out with a whole set of procurement lessons. So stay tuned for that. We're definitely going to have them ready to go for next school year so you can easily get those procurement training hours in.
Oh man, that looks great. And who wouldn't want to hang out with you and see your face more? I mean, come on now. Okay, well, what about the state level? Does California have any special rules or regulations that school food directors and LEAs need to be aware of? I know California's always got something else going on.
Yes, of course, California's got some extra things in the bag for us. So Um, the first one is SB 490. So this has kind of been a talk recently, so it might be a little bit familiar. This came out um earlier in the year, but it started January 1st. And really what it is applying to is it kind of helps us, what it does is it's basically restricting our Buy American a little bit. So the key to remember with SB 490 is that it only applies to those schools that get more than $1 million in federal reimbursement, meal
Mm.
reimbursement. So that's breakfast, lunch, summer, CACFP, snack, all of those things. And it's just federal reimbursement. So kind of evaluate how much federal money you're getting. If you're getting more than 1 million, then this is going to apply to you. And what it really does is it strengthens that Buy American language. So if you recall, the Buy American provision really means that we need to buy American products as much as possible, right? But there was a couple extra exceptions to that. And one of those exceptions was if the non-domestic product was more expensive than the no, sorry. If the non-domestic product was less expensive than the domestic one, you could go with the non-domestic. And what SB 490 does is it stipulates that what does it mean to be more expensive? And 25% more expensive is what they came up with. So, kind of my example I go with is you're looking at buying something and it's the domestic product is 24% more expensive than the non-domestic. You have to go with the domestic because it didn't quite get to that 25% more expensive. And so with this, just a note, if you have existing food contracts in place, you don't need to, this rule doesn't apply to the current contracts. It will be added to the successive contracts. So another kind of thing to keep in mind is that whenever there's local and state regulation, you have to follow the more strict one. And so, like, this is a great example of that where state law is more restrictive than the federal. So we need to make sure that we're complying with our more strict state laws.
Hmm. And that's it. Just SB 490 is the only one we have to be aware of. That's a first.
Nope, there's one more.
Ah.
Yes. So the other one is AB 778. So AB 778 is basically like the California version of Buy American. The old version of it said schools had to accept a California bid if the price was not more than 5% more than one of the outside from an outside state. They took the 5% language out, and it's basically the same as Buy American, but for California. So basically, you need to pick the California product as long as it's not more expensive than the domestic out of state
Hmm.
product, as long as it's comparable. So if you had two apple vendors, one from California, one from Washington, they came back with the same price, you would have to pick the California apple. But let's say that the California apples were more expensive, then you can go with the Washington apple since it was the lowest price.
Okay, no, that makes sense when you put it that way, comparing apples to apples. Now, thinking all the rules and regulations, you're reminding me, things to be aware of and comply with. How do I need to prepare for a procurement review?
This is a great question. So, if you remember, or hopefully you all know now, we're going to get administrative reviews from the state, but we're also going to get procurement reviews. So our procurement reviews are going to be solely looking at our purchasing practices and kind of evaluating what we had done. So kind of the things to remember with this is, our food service director, and if you have a purchasing department or procurement department in school, they might be also a little bit responsible for helping gather information and keeping track of information. You'll also um, need to gather some documentation with it. But the timeline is really every 3 years, but some states like California asked to have it extended. So luckily for you guys in California, you get procurement reviews once every 8 years, which is awesome. So that's a nice good time. And really the key things with a procurement review, there's basically two parts. There is the initial paperwork submittal part, and then the second part is really diving into what specifics were in there. So part one of our procurement review, if you would, is where they're just going to gather some initial documentation, like our code of conduct, our procurement
Mhm.
procedures, group purchasing stuff. If you have piggybacks, they're going to ask for that kind of documentation. And then kind of the big push with the part one is our vendor paid list. You have to have a vendor paid list, and you have to translate that onto a procurement table that the state provides you with. And then once you submit all of that information to the state, they will look it over, and what they're going to do is basically pick and choose. They're going to pick a certain vendor in a certain threshold, and they're going to ask more specific questions. So they're going to say, if it's in the micro purchase, I want to see your invoices for vendor X, Y, or Z. If it's the small purchase, they're going to want to see your price quotes. They're going to want to see that you went with the lowest price. They're going to ask for receipts. If you have contracts in place with small purchases, they'll probably want to see those contracts. And then if they pick a formal procurement vendor, then you're going to have to provide them with your bid packet, your contract, all of the paperwork that led you to choose that vendor. And the one thing they look at is like your scoring criteria too. So they're going to make sure that you went with the vendor that was scored the highest based off of your criteria. Um, and just a note for you, if you in California have not gotten a procurement review yet, you will get one next year. Because next year is year 8 of the first cycle. So if you haven't gotten one, you can be prepared to get one next year. And then kind of the other caveat with that too is with the procurement review, they're always going to look at the years before. So if you're getting
Mm.
reviewed in school year 24-25, they're going to look at your 23-24 school year information. So really important to, you know, make sure we have it right the year before, and kind of make sure everything's in place so that you're prepared for when your review comes around the following year.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. And actually, that's all the questions that I had for you today. Now, I'm sure other folks have questions as well. Just a heads up, everyone, because it's such a big topic, I wanted to let everyone know that we will be talking about procurement again next week. So if you have more specific questions, please keep popping them in the chat. And if we can't get to them today, we will be tackling them next week. Okay, now I'm going to pass it back to Mike before opening it up to Q&A. Thanks again,
Awesome.
Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, before we get into our Q&A session, I just wanted to talk about how you guys can talk a little bit about our services first. If you're not currently a LunchAssist Pro member, a couple of things that we offer: on-demand training videos, curated resources, professional standards, tracking tools. We also have add-on features like access to our Spanish videos, AR Bootcamp, which we talked about in a couple of series ago. And then we also have one-on-one consulting services to our California districts with our team of nutrition experts like Jackie, who is our expert today on our call. Another thing we like to mention as well, going back to purchasing, since that's the theme of the day, ways that you can purchase LunchAssist Pro services. All of our services are allowable under the KIT funds, and I know with a lot of people getting close to that June deadline, the 2021 KIT funds are getting ready to expire. So it'd be a good time for you guys to start looking at that now. A lot of things that we are doing with some of our other customers as well is working on multi-year contracts. It's a great way to utilize your KIT funds, where you can, purchase, several years in advance, using your money that you have now so you don't lose it. And then you can have access for several years. So if you guys are interested, please reach out to me directly. You can email me at mike@lunchassist.org, and I'm happy to set up a call with you guys. So again, talking about the recording access, we are always going to send out a follow-up email. It'll have links to all of the recordings, so you'll get a follow-up email from today's call, and then you'll be able to access it. The recordings will be hosted on YouTube as well. So like Emma said, our next chat is going to be next Thursday, 2 p.m. Pacific time, Procurement Part 2 with our guest expert, Emily Dunkley, who's going to be talking to us. And so we thank everybody for joining us. We hope you can stick around for our Q&A. And I'm going to go ahead and pass that back over to Emma so she can get us started.